I think we're on.
Okay, good. All right, so hello. My name is Jamal George, and with me is,
Sandy Jimenez.
all right, and we are trainers and counselors at the Options Center, which is a full service college access center. In addition to that, we are also trainers with the Options Institute, which trains professionals that work in college access in the work. Additionally, Sandy and I are both senior advisors with NYC College Line. So yes, we do a lot. And NYC College Line is a website that is part of an initiative between Options, the Department of Education, Grad NYC,
CUNY.
and CUNY. And it's a website that has a number of resources specifically for New York City students. And when I say students, I mean prospective college students, students who are already in college, and students who have just graduated college. These resources are not only for students, but also for their families and for professionals alike. Right? Today's presentation is going to focus specifically on financial aid. And just to give you just a gist of the agenda, we're first going to go through an overview of financial aid, and then we are going to take a look at the FAFSA, a quick overview of the FAFSA, and then the first steps that we believe that everyone should take before sitting down to file the FAFSA. And we're going to close out the presentation with some questions. Okay? All right. So let's get into the financial aid overview. So my first question to you is this. Where does most financial aid come from? And for those of you who are logged in, I'm going to ask that you use your chat box to give me the answer. So again, the question is, where does most financial aid come from? And we're going to give you about
2 seconds.
2 seconds. Let's say 10 seconds to put your answers in your chat box.
We're waiting.
Okay, so we see one, the schools.
Nice.
Okay, that's part of it. The government. All right, we're getting hotter and hotter.
That's right. Ooh.
What was that one?
Let's see.
Okay. All right, I think we're really hot right now. All right, so most of the financial aid that our students receive actually come from the federal government,
Thanks for everybody that participated.
right? And you can see on this pie chart here that we have our loans, and that refers to federal loans, or federal grants, or work study, and or federal tax credits and state grants taking up the majority of the pie chart. And that's why we say that most of our student financial aid comes from the federal government. And this underscores the importance of filing the FAFSA, because the FAFSA, as I like to say, or as we like to say, is the gateway application to accessing all financial aid, in particular your federal financial aid. But let's take a look at some other sources of aid on the pie chart. We see here that some of our students get their aid from institutional grants, which refer to the schools, the colleges themselves. We also see that scholarships, even though scholarships make up a very small percent of the pie chart, still our students are using scholarships to finance their education. And then we have here federal tax credits and deductions, and these are things like your 529 plan. And so here we have it, all the different sources of financial aid for our students. Okay? Now, when we think about applying to and paying for college for students, we have to consider not just the tuition, but also the other costs involved. And so when we think about paying for college, we have to keep in mind the total cost of attendance. And the total cost of attendance includes your direct cost, and your indirect costs. And direct costs are also referred to as your billed cost, because these are the costs that the school is actually going to send you a bill for. And then, or indirect costs are also referred to as your unbilled costs. The school isn't going to send you a bill for them, however, there are costs that must be met in order for you to go to school. So, under your direct cost or bill cost, you have your tuition, your mandatory fees, your health service fees, and your room and board. Basically, these are the costs that you need to cover in order to walk through those doors of the campus and take a class, right? Now, your indirect costs, on the other hand, include your travel, your books, your supplies, and your personal expenses. While the school isn't sending you a bill for these costs, we all know that you need to get to your school, especially if your school is upstate or probably in a different state, so you need to account for the traveling cost. We know that you need your books in order to take your courses, so you have to purchase your books. And whatever other supplies that you need in order to do your work in school. And like I said, while the school doesn't give you a bill for these, there are costs that must be taken care of. All right? So how do our students take care of these costs? As a matter of fact, before we get into that, here are some examples, rather, of how the costs are applied to the total cost of attendance, the direct and indirect costs. So we have here an example of CUNY Baruch, and we see that the tuition and the fees are roughly $6,000, right? And you add the room and board to that, you come up to about $8,000. However, the total cost of attendance for going to CUNY Baruch might just be $13,000 when you include the indirect cost into that. And this is why considering your indirect cost is as important as considering your direct cost, because it raises or gives you a true sense of what it will cost for you to attend a particular college. All right, let's take a look at another example with SUNY Binghamton. Here we see that the tuition is $5,000, but the room and board for SUNY Binghamton in particular, and all SUNY schools, is about $13,000, right? Oftentimes, those students get online, check out a school, and just look at the tuition to make their decision as to whether they're going to apply to a school or not, right? The tuition might just be $6,000 like it is with SUNY Binghamton, but you have to consider the room and board as part of the total cost of attendance because SUNY Binghamton is not in the city and most students that go to that school are staying on campus, right? Another reason why it's very important to consider all your direct costs and all your indirect costs in thinking about paying for a college. And lastly, we have a New York State private school, Syracuse University, and here they have divided the direct and indirect costs for you, right? And we see your tuition, your fees, and your room and board, which are your direct costs, coming up to about $54,000. And your indirect costs, even though it's not a lot, it's only about $3,000, it still forms part of the cost for going to Syracuse University. All right? So back to the question that I was asking before, how do our students afford $57,000 to go to schools like Syracuse University? The answer is through financial aid. Now, how is it determined how much financial aid to give our students? Now, one of the first things that's determined in order to find out how much a student would need in order to go to school is your EFC. And the EFC stands for your expected family contribution. And basically, this is a number that is generated after our students have filled out the FAFSA. All right, and we're going to get to the FAFSA in just a minute. But basically, it's the dollar amount that the families are expected to contribute towards the student's education. Okay? Okay. Now that we have the EFC, right, we now can determine the financial need of the student. By taking away the ESC, so the amount that the family is expected to contribute from the total cost of attendance of the school. And you come up with the financial need, or some people refer to it as the documented need for the student. And it is the documented need or the financial need that the government and the institution try to meet by giving the students financial aid. All right, do we have any questions over
We
this,
do
Andy?
have a few questions. One question talks about, would we recommend living on or off campus? And that seems like a real individual thing for students.
Yes, it is. I think so. There's some schools that it's inevitable not to live on campus. For example, a New York City student going away to SUNY Binghamton, for example, they kind of have to live on campus because most of our students don't have families that are living that close to the campus that they can stay with. And with some schools, they require that the freshmen live on campus. So, as Sandy said, it is a case-by-case situation. For students that are attending a CUNY school, it's up to them and their own situation whether or not they'll still choose to stay on campus or not. So,
Yeah, and then we have two other questions from the same student. If you get a scholarship from a school, does it cover the whole cost of attendance? And I have to say, there are some school scholarships that cover the whole cost of attendance, and there are some that are just $200, right, or $500. So you really want to go back to the school and ask more details about that. And lastly, the last question we have is, if you apply for financial aid in one state, would that also count for another state? And again, it really depends on what we're talking about here. There's certain kinds of aid which we'll possibly touch briefly that are state by state. So in New York, we have the tuition assistance program, which only applies for New York State schools. So you couldn't take that to another state. That's an example.
But you should know that there is a source of aid, your Pell Grant, that is a national thing. So if your student files a FAFSA and qualifies for a Pell Grant, it doesn't matter the state that he or she chooses to go to school, that Pell Grant remains the same. Okay? All right. So I'm just going to scroll up a bit. All right. So how is financial aid defined? You heard us talking about Pell Grants and scholarships and all those things. There are three main things that make up financial aid. The first of which is your free money. So your grants and your scholarships, right? So Pell Grant would fall under that. Sandy brought up your tuition assistance program, which is a state grant from New York State. That will fall under your grants and scholarships category. And then we have your loans. We know with loans, unlike grants and scholarships, it's not free money. The student is responsible for paying it back. And lastly, financial aid also consists of federal work study. Federal work study is like a grant, but not necessarily so, in that yes, students are awarded federal work study on their financial aid packages. However, in order to get the money, they must find a job, work that job, and get paid on a payroll schedule, so to speak. So while the money is allocated to the student, there are some extra steps that the student has to take in order to get the money.
And just a quick thing, somebody asked, how could I get, oh no, sorry. If you apply for financial aid in one state, that's the same one. Where is it? There it is. If I get a job on campus, can I pay or help pay the money that I need for school, so the cost of attendance? And yeah, you could. Work study is a great example of that. So you could do that, but you have to first get the job. So you maybe couldn't pay your bill in August or something like that, which is usually when you get your bill. But you can pay for some of the indirect costs, or if you save up your money, you can pay for some future costs. And that would be a good example of how you can use work study.
I see we have another question there. How could I get financial aid through the DREAM Act?
Yeah. Tough one, because unfortunately the DREAM Act has not been passed. So you're not really able to get financial aid through that. If the New York State DREAM Act is passed, students that are undocumented could receive aid from the state,
State,
but
yeah.
it has not been passed. So for the meantime, you need to advocate and try to get it passed, and we're all fighting that fight. But unfortunately, we're not able to get aid through the DREAM Act right now.
And for the person that asked that question, I would recommend that you connect with the New York State Youth Leadership Council. And they are doing a lot of work around the DREAM Act and pushing to get it passed for New York State undocumented students. So that's the New York State Youth Leadership Council. I'll suggest that you connect with them and see what work they're doing.
Great, excellent.
Okay. All right. So where's the next button?
Just click
All
that.
right. So we talked about the three components of financial aid. Now let's talk about where they're coming from and also the forms that our students need to fill out in order to receive these components of financial aid. So we have here that the federal grants, the federal loans, and the federal work study, these are types of financial aid that are coming from the federal government. However, in order for students to access them, our students must file the FAFSA. And if you remember, going back to our pie chart, it is the federal grants, the federal loans, and the federal work study that make up the greater percentage of aid that our students receive. So again, I want to really stress the importance of filing the FAFSA in order to access the federal grants, the federal loans, and the federal work study. All right? Now, for our New York State resident students attending New York State schools, whether public or private, they also can access a type of aid coming from the state. And Sandy mentioned it a bit earlier. It's the Tuition Assistance Program, otherwise known as TAP. So there's a TAP grant that comes from New York State government, and there are also some special scholarships that some students might be eligible for coming from the New York State government. All right? And in order to access those, the students have to file the TAP. So after filing your FAFSA, which is your federal form, it makes complete sense to go right ahead and file your state financial aid form, your TAP form. All right? And lastly, or schools, mostly your private schools, they too give our students grants, loans, which is less often, and scholarships, right? And in order to receive those grants, loans, and scholarships from the individual schools, you have to file your FAFSA because, like I said, it's your gateway application to all financial aid. So your FAFSA, FAFSA, FAFSA. There's some private institutions that are going to request that the student also file the profile. And lastly, there are some schools that, in addition to the FAFSA and the profile, will request that the student fill out some additional institutional financial aid forms. Okay? Okay. So we talked about the FAFSA and stressing the importance of filing the FAFSA. So let's just give you some FAFSA basics, and Sandy, you can feel free to jump in at any point if I miss something.
Absolutely.
All right. So the FAFSA, who can tell me what it stands for? FAFSA. What does FAFSA stand for? Just type it in your little chat box. 10 seconds again.
Ooh, we got an answer. Let's see. Yeah.
Right. So free application for federal student aid, and that's what FAFSA stands for. Now the operative word in that definition is free. So the FAFSA is a free application for federal student aid. And that's why your students should be directed to go to www.fafsa.ed.gov or just www.fafsa.gov. Now, be warned, there is a FAFSA.com out there that will charge our students for filing the FAFSA, and we don't want them going to that site because it's for free, right? As in, the application is a free application,
Right,
so they
right.
shouldn't be paying for it. So one of these two sites, FAFSA.edu.gov or FAFSA.gov, our students should be going to. The FAFSA doesn't have a deadline per se, and so students can apply for federal financial aid at any point throughout the academic year. So for example, you might have a student that's starting school in the spring semester. That student is fully eligible to receive federal student aid in the total amount that they're eligible for. So they can go right ahead and file that FAFSA to get the aid for that spring semester. All right? The FAFSA, primarily our students fill it out online. However, there is a paper version of the FAFSA that our students can complete. But I haven't seen a student complete a paper version in years.
Yeah, it's
So,
so much better online.
yeah, much more efficient online. And when you fill out the FAFSA, you want to be using financial estimates because the FAFSA becomes live on January 1st of every year. And there's a section in the FAFSA that asks for parental financial information and student financial information. And the way that you get that information is by using your taxes. But we know that a number of us are not filing our taxes until February, March, April, May, right? And so we may not have the actual numbers or the actual income worked in the previous year when we're filing our FAFSA on January 1st. And so, if you are filing it that early, you want to be using financial estimates from a tax return or your most recent tax return. All right? But you have to remember to go back in once you file your taxes and make those updates to the numbers or to the estimates that you had put in previously. And lastly, in order to sign the FAFSA so that it is processed, the student needs a PIN. Okay, and the student, not only the student, but the parent also needs a PIN in order to sign the FAFSA. There are some cases where the parent is not able to get a PIN, especially for our undocumented parents, because in order to apply for a PIN, you need a social security number. And so in that case, when the parent does not have a PIN, he or she can print out a signature page, sign it, and mail it into FAFSA. However, the student must have a PIN, and you can apply for a PIN for the student and the parent by going to pin.ed.gov. All right? But in order for your FAFSA to be processed, you have to sign it, both the student and the parent if the student is a dependent student.
Great, great. So I'm going to take over. What we're going to move to now are a few questions that everybody should ask themselves or ask a student if you're a professional before they go ahead and fill out the FAFSA. We think that these questions will help clarify any of the more complicated family situations. So we're going to start with the first question, which is, who should file the FAFSA? And there's two reasons you would file the FAFSA. One reason is for federal financial aid. And for federal financial aid, the people that are eligible are U.S. citizens, permanent residents, refugees and asylees, and other humanitarian groups, right? Then there's a group of people that can still file the FAFSA, but they would only be eligible for institutional aid. And those are folks that have student visas, exchange visas, or G-series visas. Those are for folks that work in the United Nations, for example. So those are the only people that should be filing the FAFSA. Here's a quiz for you. Here's a question. And you can type the answer in your little screen. Should citizens with undocumented parents file the FAFSA? So if you're a student and your parents don't have a green card, should you still file the FAFSA? Let's give it a few seconds for somebody to answer us. Ooh, somebody answered real quick. Yes, exclamation point we got. That's correct. Everybody that is a citizen, whether their parents are documented or undocumented, should file the FAFSA. Any sort of citizen, no matter what your parents are doing and what their status is eligible for all the same stuff that other citizens are eligible for. So definitely, we definitely want to see our citizens with undocumented parents do their FAFSA. And on time too, don't wait too long. But if the student themselves are undocumented, they should not file the FAFSA. Undocumented students are not eligible for federal financial aid. So if you fill out a FAFSA, it's just going to be rejected and sent back to you. So you won't need to fill it out. In some special cases, certain school programs or scholarship programs may ask you to fill out a FAFSA on paper and bring it in person in order to check your finances or something like that to see if you're eligible for the program or the scholarship. So you can do that if you're undocumented, but let them know that you do not want this information shared with the federal government. So that is a possibility for you. Okay, let's see what else we got. And thank you to all of you that answered.
Sandy, before you continue, we have a question here
Yes.
about paying back aid that you received. Now, if the student receives a federal loan, it is expected that the student pays back the federal loan. However, a federal grant or some sort of scholarship coming out of the state or the institution, those do not need to be paid back. But your loans absolutely need to be paid back.
Yeah, definitely. Good one. Good question. All right. So the next question that we have are set 2 of 5 because we have 5 questions. So the next question is, who is considered independent on the FAFSA? So these are people that if you are whatever the item says, you do not have to put your parents' information. And this is it. These are the only categories. So if you're 24, if you're married, if you're applying for grad school, if you're supporting dependents, if you are in the U.S. Armed Forces or have been in the Armed Forces, if you have a legal guardian, if you're an orphan in foster care, or a ward of the court after age 13, if you're emancipated, or if you're an unaccompanied homeless youth, you don't have to put parental information. The thing about this is that for all of these categories on the FAFSA, there's a question, and I actually think I might have a screenshot somewhere. Let me jump to that for 2 seconds. So this is the screen on your FAFSA where you would answer if you're one of those things, and you would put yes, and then you would be able to skip ahead and not have to put parental information. Okay? But you need to be ready to prove that you're that thing. So if you say that you are in foster care, you have to be able to provide some sort of information about that. And that's it, really. These are people that are automatically independent. You might be somebody that feels independent or has been living on their own for a really long time, but you might still have to put parental information on the FAFSA unless you fit one of these, like I think it's 13 categories. Let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question. That is not the question I wanted to ask, computer. So I am 18 and I have a 2-year-old daughter. Am I independent? Can somebody tell me that? Controversial, maybe a trick question. Ooh, what happened there?
We have a no.
We have a no.
Another
no. All right, we've got some knowledgeable people on this webcast. Oh, okay. So here's the deal. Maybe, maybe not.
Right.
So the question really on the FAFSA is, are you supporting dependents? So if this is an 18-year-old that's like living on their own and or maybe has like a public assistance case in their name with this daughter on the budget, that person is independent and they don't have to put parental information. But if this is an 18-year-old that's living with mom and dad and the 2-year-old daughter, that's harder to prove. And if that's the case, you're probably going to have to put your parents' information. So there's a little bit extra kind of thinking that has to come with some of these questions, like this one in particular. And thank you for the participation. I'm very pleased. Okay, let's keep going. And I showed, so these are the screens that I told you on the FAFSA, and then depending on what you answer, it'll tell you on this screen whether you're dependent or not. And in order to be independent, you only have to answer yes to one. Now, here's something. Sometimes we have situations where it seems like maybe we're independent, but we're not sure. So let's talk about some of those. This page right here is talking about students that feel they might be independent, but they're not for the FAFSA. Maybe you are in your mind and the way you live your life. That's cool. But for FAFSA purposes, if your parents refuse to give you information, if you don't want to ask your parents for information, if you've just been living on your own for a long time, or you just don't want to talk to your parents because maybe you had a fight or something like that, that doesn't make you independent. And what that means is that you have to figure out a way to get that information from your parents. All right, so whether it's asking them, the student asking, the counselor asking, another adult asking, somebody has to get that information going. Otherwise, you may just not be able to fill out the FAFSA. And that's really unfortunate because you won't get financial aid for your schooling. Then we have some other cases that are also not on the FAFSA, but they are very extreme, I would say. So these are situations that may be cause for a process that's called a dependency override. And this is a special process, a special kind of a professional judgment is what it's called, where students can apply with their counselors for a status of independence, okay? So for example, if the student's in a family where there's abuse, or if the parents have abandoned the student, if both parents are incarcerated or institutionalized, or if the parents, due to some reason, can't really be parents, there may be a possibility to apply for a dependency override. And the process for a dependency override is to communicate with all the schools and figure out, how can I prove to you that this is my situation? And it's usually a form you fill out, it's usually a letter from the student, possibly, but definitely a letter from somebody that really, really knows about the situation. So it could be a school counselor, it could be a social worker, a doctor, a priest, somebody that's outside the family that can say, this is really happening, this student is abandoned or is being abused. So in this case, the schools would then say, okay, we believe you, you can fill out the FAFSA on your own, or no, you still need your parents' information. Okay, so that's a possibility.
And I think it's worth mentioning that, the dependency override process is a very
Absolutely.
tedious process. And so we usually advise counselors that it should be your last resort. It should be the last thing that you must turn to when filling out the FAFSA or when trying to figure out the dependency determination of the student.
Yeah, yeah. We have two questions that basically are asking the same thing. What if my parents refuse to pay for college? Now, what we're talking about here is something different. Just because your parents gave you information for the FAFSA doesn't mean that they have to pay for college. And that's really important because sometimes that's why parents don't want to give you the information. Because they feel they can't afford it or they don't want to help you pay for whatever reason. So the FAFSA is just about getting information. And then they'll let you know how much you have to pay for school, basically. So later on, if your parents refuse to pay for college, that is unfortunate, but it's not completely related to filling out the FAFSA. I'm sorry. All right, let's see what else we got. So here's another question. Who goes on the FAFSA, right? So we've already decided whether you're independent or dependent. Now, who goes on there? If you're a dependent student, it's just you, the student, and your parent or parents. And if you're independent, it's just you. And if you're married, that person too. Okay, that's it. FAFSA only cares about parents, and only certain kind of parents. That's the other thing. FAFSA is really concerned about legal parents, and that means they're either biological or adoptive parents. They have some sort of legal relationship with students, or they're step parents that are married to the biological or adoptive parent. That's who goes on the FAFSA as a parent. Here's something that'll help you remember this idea. Jamal loves it. Who is considered a parent? So here's the hint, and it's the word Simba. You all know about Simba from The Lion King, but do you know about Simba from the FAFSA? Let's see if I can get this to work just how I like it. Let's see. So Simba stands for step, if married, biological, or adoptive. And there's a lion, of course. So that's what we're talking about. Those are the types of parents that go on FAFSA. Your step parents, if they're married to your biological or adoptive parent, and of course your biological or adoptive parent. That's it. No other kind of parent. In your heart, maybe your grandma is your parent, maybe somebody like that, and that's amazing and wonderful. And we can't take that away from you, of course. But for FAFSA, that's not the person that they want to hear about. Let's see. So not your grandparents. They don't want to hear about your foster parents or legal guardians, because if you have a foster parent or a legal guardian, you're independent. Remember? All right? They don't want to hear about siblings. They don't want to hear about uncles or aunts or friends or anybody like that, unless they've adopted you. Okay. And here's a little something. I hope it's not too much, but once you've decided that you're dependent and that you have to put your parents, you should know a little something more. You should know that parents can go on the FAFSA regardless of gender, and this only matters if we're talking about two parents. So if you've got two moms or two dads, starting this year, they both can go on the FAFSA, and that's kind of a big deal. Okay? Now, if you're living with just one parent, that's your legal parent, that means biological or adoptive, just that one parent goes on FAFSA. If you're living with two legal parents, biological or adoptive, who are married to each other, they both have to go on there. Doesn't matter if they file taxes together or separately, they both go on your FAFSA. If you're living with one legal parent, biological or adoptive, who's married to a step parent, they also both have to go on there. And lastly, if you're living with two legal parents who are not married to each other and are living together, they both go on the FAFSA too. So you could be living with a mom and a dad that are they're both your mom and dad that never got married. They still have to both go on the FAFSA.
Yeah. And that's also very new.
That's totally new this year, so you should know that. All right, so here's another question. I think it's the last one, okay? So let's say my parents are divorced and I live with my mom, but my dad claims me on the taxes. Who do I have to put on my FAFSA? Somebody give me an answer, please. Who's going to guess at this one?
We have no answers.
Silence on the airwaves. It's a tough one, I know. All right. Should I give it to them?
Okay.
All right, I'll give it to you. All right, so if your parents are divorced and you live, somebody gave us an answer before I said it. Hold on. Ooh. Okay, so we've got a couple of answers. If your parents are divorced, you're going to put who you live with. So if I live with my mom, that's who I'm going to put on the FAFSA. It's really interesting because FAFSA is not very interested in the parent you don't live with. They're also not interested in who claims you on taxes. That's really confusing for people. So that's something you should know. You should know. So here's the rule. This is the last big question that we have for the FAFSA is if your parents are divorced or separated, the first thought you should have about who goes on the FAFSA is the parent who you lived with the most during the year. And that's known as your custodial parent. And that's really who FAFSA wants to hear about. So that's your first thought. If you're in a situation where it's not very clear, maybe you live 50% with mom and 50% with dad, for example, if that's your situation, then the next question you should ask yourself is, well, who provides more financial support for me? And then think about that parent. And that's who you would put on your FAFSA. And if that's still not clear because they kind of do it 50-50, then you're going to go ahead and just kind of bite the bullet and put the parent who makes the least amount of money. And that's who would go on your FAFSA. But you first gotta think about, do I live with one parent the most? Because that's really the right answer.
Right.
And if that parent that you pick for the FAFSA is married to somebody else, so they're remarried to a step parent, remember that step parent also has to go on your FAFSA. Okay? That's all we had planned to talk about. We really think these 5 questions, so who can file the FAFSA, who is independent, who goes on the FAFSA, who is a parent, and then if my parents are separated or divorced, who do I pick? Those 5 questions, we really think if you think through that for yourself or for the student that you're helping, that you can figure out what to do with the FAFSA. And don't forget to file the FAFSA on time so you can get the most money that's out there. So check out all your schools and figure out what their deadlines are and send that FAFSA in before the deadline. That's real important.
And I would also say that in addition to knowing the answers to these questions that we've just been through, the FAFSA, the revised version of it actually, has a really fortified help and hints section.
Right.
So anytime that you're stuck, you put your cursor in the field and the help and the hints come right up to the right hand side of the screen. And it's really, really, really detailed and helpful. So that coupled with the what we've just taken you through, I'm sure you would have no difficulty in helping your students fill out the FAFSA.
Jamal, what if they have difficulty? What should they do?
They can definitely log on to nyccollegeline.org and use the Ask an Advisor function on there. Right?
Yeah, you can ask us any question that you want, and Jamal or I or one of our other advisors will answer you promptly within 48 hours. Also, you can use our search bar on NYC
Correct.
College Line and find a program in your neighborhood that can help you one-on-one to fill out the FAFSA and your college applications. What else?
And you can find the resources with the same information that we provided you with today on NYC College Line by doing a simple search too.
Yeah.
Something as simple as FAFSA. And you can find the first steps. What else?
And every month there's a scholarship that you can apply for.
That's right.
In different ways. So you gotta make an account. Now that you're online, go on nyccollegeline.org and get an account and start looking and start getting help and do your FAFSA.
Questions?
Questions, we're here. Ooh, let's see. We got something here. The question says, what kinds of programs are there where I can get someone to help me fill out the form?
Okay.
So when you go on College Line, we're really lucky because in New York City, there's so many programs. So College Line is all this information about all the programs that are out there that help students access college. So it'll be stuff like, programs at community centers or after school programs where you can get counseling, like where we said we work, right? We work at Goddard Riverside Community Center Options Program, and our program offers free counseling to students that want to go to college. And one of the things we do is fill out the FAFSA. And you can find programs just like ours in your neighborhood that will help you fill out the FAFSA and anything else that you need to fill out that's related to college.
And all you have to do is, once you log on to the homepage of nyccollegeline.org, if you scroll down a little, you'll see a little button that asks if you want to find a program in your neighborhood or browse by borrow. You click that and you use the filters along the left-hand side of the screen, and you can find a program just like that.
Super easy. Do it.
Any other questions?
Well, we're still here for questions, but I don't want to let you go without saying thank you for joining us. This was super fun, and thank you for your participation. It could have gone another way. It could have gone another way. So we're very happy that all of you helped us with our mini quizzes. All right. I'm guessing that's it.
Yeah, I think so. Alrighty, thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day. Oh, no, wait, we got something, did we? Oh, we gotta thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Alrighty.
Cool.